It is such a joy to be back. I can't tell you how much of my heart has remained in Hawaii. Though I've not been back here now for 6, 7 years. But I have many friends and colleagues in the audience with whom I, in both the public school world and the independent school world, that I've connected with and reconnected with over the last week of being back. How many of you are from independent schools? Raise your hands, please. How many from charter schools? Raise your hands. And of course, public schools. Raise your hands. How many of you are elementary teachers? Raise your hands. Middle school teachers? Raise your hands. High school teachers? Raise your hands. How many of you are administrators? Raise your hands. How many of you are concerned parents and citizens? Raise your hands. I didn't see a couple of hands go back. I'm a little worried about that. I ask these because I think we must come together to understand the new world in which we live and how best to prepare young people for that world. When I began my teaching career, and yes, I am a recovering high school English teacher, it was the twilight of the industrial era. And it was the dawn of what people were beginning to call the knowledge economy, and the need for knowledge workers was what we had begun talking about. A lot of people still make the mistake in thinking we are still in a knowledge economy. We're not. Computers increasingly collect, aggregate, analyze, and disseminate knowledge without any human intervention. More and more jobs that are routine jobs that require manipulating knowledge or information are going away, being automated, offshore. No, we live in the innovation era. And that's an era where there is no longer a competitive advantage in knowing knowing more than the person next to you, because guess what? Google knows everything. The world simply no longer cares how much your graduates know. What the world cares about is not what they know, but what they can do with what they know. And that is a brand new and completely different problem. Transcripts, diplomas, losing their value and currency. Why? Because they are certificates of seat time served, whether high school or college. They are not certificates of mastery. There is immediate implications and complications for our graduates. Give an example. The highest level, Google used to only hire Ivy League kids with the highest test scores and GPAs. That's how you got a job at Google. The assumption was, well, we need the smartest kids in the world to come work for us, and therefore we're going to go to places where the smartest kids have gone to school. Well, along comes Laszlo Bach, Senior VP of People Operations, analyzes the data like a good Googler, and discovers all the indices they've been using for a decade to hire are worthless. His word. He goes on to say the skills you need to succeed in a competitive academic environment, there are absolutely no relationship to the skills you need to succeed in the innovation era. Right now, today, Google doesn't even ask for a transcript. The word college does not appear on the Google website, and 15% of Google's new hires do not have a BA degree at all. Well, I thought, that's Google, those people, Anyway, so I was in Ho Chi Minh City 3 winters ago at the invitation of Deloitte, not a super, glamorous high-tech company, but accounting consulting firm. Having lunch with the CEO before I did a presentation to area business leaders, she knew a little of my affiliations to Harvard. She said, we used to hire the smartest kids from the best universities, but we don't do that anymore, she said, because it turns out they don't work out so well. She said, now we look for good kids, and we put them through a summer-long boot camp to see how they solve problems collaboratively. Then we think about offering them a job. Not what they know, but what they can do. The implications for employment are truly frightening. Now, we hear about a full employment economy. What we don't hear about are the students who are recent graduates of colleges who are underemployed. It's about 50%. You know what underemployed means? They are BA Ristas, BA bartenders, kids with BA degrees, not earning a BA wage, and increasingly unable to pay back an average of $33,000 of debt. They have a diploma, but they don't really have skills in innovation. So since I was last here, been really preoccupied with this question of what must we do differently to prepare young people for the innovation era. Now first, some clarification. I've discovered there's two kinds of innovation. One kind of innovation is about bringing new possibilities to life. Now that's pretty rare. That's a matter of an extraordinary talent converging at a particular time in history. Think of Steve Jobs. That's more a matter of nature than nurture. But then there's the other kind of innovation. And that is the innovation that is all about creative problem solving. In every domain, not just high tech. Big business, small business, nonprofit, first world, third world. Issues related to sustainability, health, education, not just gizmos. Young people who are creative problem solvers have a huge competitive advantage over everyone else, no matter whether they went to school, no matter where they went to school. Now here's the good news. We are born curious, creative, imaginative. That's the human DNA. The average 5-year-old asks 100 questions a day, and most kindergartners think of themselves as artists. But then something happens. We call it school. Because you see, the longer kids are in school, research tells us the less curious they become, the more compliant. So what must we do differently? To answer that question, I interviewed for my more recent work a wide variety of young people, all in their 20s, all of whom were creative problem solvers. They recognized for their skills. Half women, half men. Some from privilege, some from poverty. And I've increasingly been doing these kinds of conversations all over the world. I asked them about what influences have made the greatest difference in their lives. I interview all their parents, see if I could discern patterns of parenting. And yes, I do find some. I asked them, of course, about their education. Well, that led me to my first very troubling discovery. You see, some of these kids have gone to our leading universities, specifically Harvard, Stanford, MIT, and Carnegie Mellon. And they all told me they had become creative problem solvers in spite of their schooling, not because of it. I was fairly demoralized. But I pressed. I said, can you tell me about a teacher who's made a difference in your life? They all can name one, sometimes several. Grade range of those teachers was first grade to graduate school. So I went and interviewed all of those teachers. Watched some of them teach. That led to my second very troubling discovery. You see, all of those teachers who had been so influential in the lives of these kids were outliers, teaching in ways that were fundamentally different than their peers, yet remarkably similar to one another. I suspect there are a bunch of them in this audience today. Then I spent time observing and interviewing in those few schools that really do teach creative problem solving and have a track record. Brand new MIT Media Lab, the Olin College of Engineering, the D School at Stanford, High Tech High, New Tech High, Montessori classrooms, racial healing classrooms. And I came again to see a pattern, a remarkable pattern of learning and teaching that developed the capacity of many, many students to be creative problem solvers, each in their own ways. And so what I've come to understand is that there is a fundamental set of contradictions between the traditional culture of schooling, which goes back 125 years to the beginning of the Industrial Era, and the new culture of learning that develops the capability to be a creative problem solver. 5 contradictions. Contradiction number 1. Traditional schooling is all about rewarding and celebrating and measuring individual achievement. It's fine. There's a place for that. But the problem is, innovation is a team sport. There is no creative problem solving without deep collaboration. Knowing this, these teachers created teams that were accountable to one another. This was not one of those group project things where one kid does all the work. No, there was accountability internally, which I'll talk more about. And they valued teamwork as much as individual achievement, not one or the other. And most importantly, they team taught whenever possible. One reason we have so little innovation in education, I believe, is because we are so profoundly isolated as a profession. We teachers are isolated, working alone all day, every day. Principals are isolated. Complex area superintendents in many ways work alone. I'll talk more about that in a moment as we talk about new ways of thinking about accountability and autonomy. Contradiction number 2 is all about how we compartmentalize knowledge and in favor of specialization. Fine, there's a role for that, but the problem is you cannot understand or solve a problem using one academic discipline. Not possible. Sustainability. Independent energy. Not possible. Multiple disciplines. Knowing this, these teachers created interdisciplinary courses organized around a real problem or a big question. Contradiction number 3 is about the culture of the classroom, the role of the teacher. Culture of a classroom, and so often is a culture of passivity. It's a culture of consumption. It's a culture of compliance, where kids are sitting and getting. And there's only one expert in the room, and that's the one at the front doing all the talk. Very different is the culture of a classroom where you're learning creative problem solving. You're producing, not consuming. You're acquiring knowledge just in time to solve a real problem or answer a big question. And the role of the teacher is profoundly different. Teachers' roles in this kind of classroom are that of a performance coach, not a facilitator, too weak. A performance coach coaching students to a higher performance standard. Whether as you see it on an athletic field or in an auditorium. Performance coaching, but in the classroom. Contradictions 4 and 5 I think are the most challenging of all. Contradiction 4, you see, is all about the F word in schools. Failure. Worst thing that can happen in school. What everybody wants to avoid, teachers as much as kids. Crippling the fear of failure. Creates tremendous risk aversion. But here's the problem. Innovation demands that you take risks, that you make mistakes, and that you fail. I went to IDEO, the most innovative design company in the world. The company motto is fail early and fail often. What if we said that in school? Other companies talk about failing fast, failing forward, failing cheap, failing smart, but failing. Now, they don't mean failure in an academic sense. They're talking about a methodology of innovation called iteration, rapid prototyping, learning from mistakes. Version 2.0. Now, it's not just the world of innovation. It is also how we all learn best. How many of you have learned more from your mistakes than your successes? Of course, we all have. How do we learn to talk? How do we learn to walk? What if we've been told by some adult, I'm sorry, you can't speak until you can speak in complete and grammatically correct sentences. Oh, by the way, bicycle riding completely out of the question because we know you're going to fall and skin. Increasingly, we're rethinking assessment and grading. Bell curves make no sense. Now in the adult world, not for kids. How many want to fly with a C- airline pilot? Raise your hands. Or as my friend Paul Turnbull said yesterday, how many you want to fly with a pilot who's kind of pretty good at takeoffs, but not so good at landings? Truly frightening. The only 3 grades I can justify are A, B, or incomplete. A B is my performance standard that I expect every student to meet. Now, I may vary the amount of time or support that student needs to meet that performance standard in my class, but that's the B. The work is not failing. The only failure I acknowledge is the failure not to show up, not to try at all. And an A, I think, should be reserved for real human excellence, which is rare. And how do I assess work? I never grade individual papers, ever. Give lots of feedback, conferencing, and so on, but I assess a body of work and look for evidence of mastery to a performance standard that is very, very clear to students. Contradiction 5, I think, is about motivation. I'm sorry. It's the real problem here, I think, so often in schools, is that we rely heavily on extrinsic incentives to motivate learning. Carrots and sticks, fear. But what I discovered is that these young innovators, again, from both privilege and poverty, were far, far more intrinsically motivated. They did their best work in school, not to get an A, but because it was work worth doing. They sought jobs in companies where they felt they could make a contribution. So I went back and I tried to understand, what had their parents and teachers done? How had their parents and teachers influenced the kind of strengthening of the intrinsic motivations we were born with? And I discovered another pattern. Both parents and teachers had explicitly encouraged three things: play, passion, and purpose. Parents encouraged much more exploratory play, fewer toys, toys without batteries, more time outside. Teachers tried to bring an element of playfulness, adult playfulness, into the classroom. Ed Carrier teaches engineering at Stanford. Talked to me about using the criteria of a certain element of whimsy as he designed projects for his teams of students. Engineering and whimsy? I hadn't heard that combination. But as these kids grew older, the parents were very intentional about trying to expose their kids to new ideas, new possibilities, new interests, trying to constantly validate their curiosity, whatever it was. And I discovered that these parents really believed that more important than academic achievement for its own sake is grit. And we know research validates that. Now, grit is more important than IQ. What do we mean by grit? Perseverance, tenacity, self-regulation, self-discipline, focus, concentration. Where does that come from? How do you develop grit? Well, it's increasingly clear you do not develop grit because there's a tiger mom sitting on your shoulder yelling in your ear, practice, practice! No, it comes from the pursuit of an interest. It comes from a curiosity, which becomes an interest, which grows into a passion over time. Teachers the same, and I'll talk about this in a moment too. Bringing time into the classroom where students can pursue their own interests, ask their own questions. But in every case, what happened was these kids' interests and passions morphed, they evolved as they become young adults, and they matured to a deeper sense of purpose. And that's because both parents and teachers had explicitly encouraged one simple idea. The idea that you know very well in this culture here. The idea that we are not here on this earth only to serve ourselves. That it's a responsibility to give back and to make a difference. So much of Hawaiian culture is about that spirit. And that's what these students learned from their parents and teachers. Kind of moral foundation of empathy and giving back. So let me spend a couple of minutes now talking about what I think may be some implications for your next steps here. And then I'm going to show a very short video clip, an outtake from the film that some of you may have seen, Most Likely to Succeed. Then I'm going to give you a chance to talk to each other for a few minutes, to talk story to one another, what you're hearing, but most importantly, what your questions are. Then we're going to have a conversation, which is we have time for. Daryl will probably pull me off at some point. We run out of time, but I want to hear your questions, your opinions, so be thinking about that. So first steps are very clear. First steps are steps this state made almost before any other. First steps are to be very, very clear about the skills and dispositions, the new education outcomes that matter most. You took this step years ago as a state. You may have forgotten. They're called general learner outcomes. And whether they are the general learner outcomes in public schools or whether they're the aims of a Punahou education, of course, sometime this week, or whether they are the learner profile, which I saw at Mid-Pacific yesterday, what they spell out are skills, habits of mind, habits of heart that are essential. And they are essential not just for the innovation era. What's so clear to me today is that the skills you need for work in the innovation era, the skills you need for lifelong learning, and the skills you need for active and informed citizenship have converged. They're the same skills. So that's where we start. Redefining what it means to be an educated adult in the innovation era. As a worker, as a citizen, as a learner. Then comes the hard part. And in some ways, crafting that beautiful language is not easy, but it's not the hard part. The hard part is assessment and accountability. That's the hard part. And let me introduce a couple of thoughts. First of all, we have to separate systems accountability from assessment for learning of all kids. Systems accountability is essential. It's not going to go away. And there are positive reasons for this. You know, we did not do a good job years ago in really understanding the achievement gaps. So systems accountability, though, has to be rethought and used in ways that other countries use it. We should not be testing every kid every year. You already know that. But what takes its place? We should be doing sampling, demographically representative sampling of all kinds of kids across the system every few years. That's how every other country in the world does it. We're the only country that tests every kid every year. And saving the money from not having to test every kid every year, we invest in radically better forms of testing. Radically. I'll give you an example. The College and Work Readiness Assessment, a great 21st century assessment. It's essentially a simulation of a problem kids have to work on and solve online. It's an assessment of analytic reasoning, critical thinking, problem solving, and writing. A really good 21st century assessment. Or I'll even give a crazy other example from the world of advanced placement, a world that, as most of you know, I've been highly critical of. But you know that advanced placement is actually getting rid of advanced placement? Right. Well, first of all, they got a little problem that more and more colleges are giving no credit for AP courses, Dartmouth being the most recent. But what was so exciting is I learned about this most recently. The newest AP course is a course organized around learning how to do research collaboratively and individually. It's called the AP Research Seminar. It's a 2-year course. And what's the culminating test? You have to do real research, and you have to present and defend that research. It is a qualitative assessment. What about, you guys can do this, working together. This is part of the kind of the Hawaii spirit. You've got the independent schools that have the same problem. You've got this problem as a system. How do you design accountability 2.0? How do you design a better system of assessment? One that is for systems and also an assessment for learning for every kid. I want to see every student have a digital portfolio that follows them through school. I want to see them regularly present and defend work. I want to see regular exhibitions of mastery, exhibition nights in schools, where students present, talk about the work. Real work presented to real audiences. That gets me to another piece of accountability I want to talk about. With deep respect, and Daryl and I have been talking about this, I think that autonomy doesn't quite capture the forms of accountability that has to replace compliance. Compliance, let's be clear, compliance is broken. It doesn't work. It doesn't work in the classroom. You get the minimum from a kid, that's called compliance, right? Going through the motions. It doesn't work in a school. It doesn't work in a school system. It doesn't work in a company or a corporation. Compliance does not work. And that's what you've had for too long. But the alternative is not merely autonomy. The alternative is not merely to suggest that schools are the unit of change. Yes, they are, but you've got to add another piece. We have to work together. Communities of practice need to work together to solve problems of practice. I'll give an example because I learned it right here from Art Souza in West Hawaii and his principles. We were struggling with a question. This is the problem of practice work. What is good teaching and learning? How do we know it when we see it? And how do we help all teachers improve? Right? So we did learning walks through schools. I'm not in favor of walkthroughs because teachers hear that and think drive-bys. No. But we did learning walks. What do? 4 principals and Art, a couple of us, we spent 2 days together looking at lessons and assessing the lessons. We look at a lesson for a while and we come back. Now, be clear, we were looking at lessons for lesson study. We were not evaluating teachers. Huge difference. Raise your hands if you want to be evaluated regularly, especially with tests as a teacher. Raise your hands if you want to do that. No. Raise your hands, though, if you think you've taught a perfect lesson. Raise your hand. Of course not. Oh, you have? Really? Oh, okay. You're just fooling. But seriously, we know we haven't taught perfect lessons, but we don't always know what we did well or how to improve. And that's the job of a coach. And that's what principals should be doing. But how do you do that? We've never talked about that. So we did this thing again for 2 days. We talked about a lot of things, but then we actually went through and talked about lessons. What was the strength of that lesson? What grade might you give that lesson, not the teacher? Lesson study. And we started at the beginning of 2 days like this. No agreement. We were a community of practice trying to solve a problem and practice together. At the end of 2 days, we went from this to this to this to total agreement. And then we role played. We role played conferencing with a teacher. Said, how do we give helpful feedback? Evaluate. That's easy. That doesn't improve instruction. Giving a teacher a grade. Feedback does. Coaching does. How do we learn how to do that? To me, that's the unit of accountability. It is reciprocal, relational accountability. Peers working together on problems of practice as a community of practice. That's the change engine in education. And it demands that we overcome isolation. And it's as much the case in public schools as independent schools. I saw at Mid-Pacific yesterday, teachers and principals working together on problems of practice K-12. In this case, it was how to do inquiry learning, how to have meaningful capstone projects across all curriculums. To me, that's the conversation that needs to happen here. Learning from folks who've been pioneers in this work, like Bart and his principals. Then the second thing we do, and I heard the governor say this, and I was so excited, we need to invest in R&D for education, research and development. You know, there's no innovation without research and development. Companies as diverse as Google, 20% R&D budget all the way down to 3M with a 6% R&D budget. What if? The governor mentioned it, so it's maybe not a what if, it's maybe a when. So individual schools, complex areas, states had an innovation fund or innovation funds to which teams of teachers could apply to try new things. Interdisciplinary courses, portfolio-based assessment, new forms of grading that are more meaningful to kids. Those are the kinds of things I'm talking about. Teams of teachers apply to innovation funds, maybe funds to visit other schools, funds to work together over the summer, funds to have a reduced course load in order to create new courses. Then we learn from those folks. We actually maybe even rethink preparation of teachers by learning from and with those teams in greenhouses that are lab schools. Ultimately, that's what we want. That's what the charter schools should be. They should be our lab schools. They should be R&D organizations that inform the work of the rest of us. Lastly, we need to think about where do we start with student motivation? Where do we start with giving students more opportunities to ask their own questions? Keep that curiosity alive. What if? How many of you know about Google time? Raise your hands. So, that is, if you work at Google, you have permission to play on company time a day a week. I don't mean play video games. Play in the adult sense of working on a project about what you're passionate about. Other companies have been doing this for years. 3M. And an engineer at 3M many, many years ago said, you know, there ought to be a use for this glue that doesn't quite stick. Post-it notes. Engineering playing. So what if we said to a student, you're going to have a certain percentage of time that is your Google time. We explained it's not free time. It's an opportunity for you to be the architect of your own learning, a certain percentage of time. Punahou took the radical step just last week of creating the G term, 3 days, where students and teachers work together on things that they were totally passionate about. Not for a grade, not as a course, but as a community practice working together. So I've been sort of exploring this idea with some teachers. I've gotten some interesting emails from teachers. One 5th grade teacher emailed me recently saying she had eliminated academic homework on the weekends for her students and instead explained Google time. So the only provision that students, when they came back on Monday, had to talk about what they'd done over the weekend. That's the accountability, the reciprocal relational accountability. She didn't know what to expect that first Monday. She was, frankly, scared to death because she'd taken a risk. Good for her. We all need to take thoughtful, responsible risks. So what happened? Well, she told me. She said, you know, one student came in and talked about how he had always wanted to learn to cook, so he spent the entire weekend reading recipes and cooking. Another student said she had always wanted to learn a musical instrument, and so she spent the whole weekend looking at YouTube instructional videos and beginning to practice. The one that I found most moving, though, was about the story of the girl who'd been adopted by a family, and it was from China. She spent the whole weekend learning about Chinese history and culture, about which she knew nothing. This teacher told me she had never seen such excitement on a Monday morning in school, and rarely ever. Got an email from a high school English teacher. Turned his last period of the week into Google time. When he announced it to his students, the kids sitting in the front rows, you know, the ones who always have their hands up, they scratched their heads, would push back and say, "You mean you're not going to tell us what to do?" They were a little disturbed. Kids in the back row went crazy and had all kinds of things they wanted to do. He said it forced him to rethink how he really saw and understood his students. He saw something from that back row he had never seen before. So I want to close with just one idea and one applause. I really do deeply believe that you here in this state can do something no other state can do. In part because it's structural, in part because it's embedded in your community, this idea of working together. That you in this state can create a model for education for the 21st century. You have the leadership, you have the skill, you have the will, you have the passion. You can do it. So I simply want to end by thanking you. Thank you for your questions, your commitments, your concerns. Above all, for the work you do for kids every single day. Thank you. If you can get it, I may need a little help. So, as you watch this video, I'd like you to look for three things. What content knowledge are students learning? What skills are they learning? And how are they being motivated to learn? Three things: content knowledge, skill, and motivation. Because in the innovation era, content knowledge still matters, but skills matter more, and motivation matters most. Because if you are self-motivated, you will continue to acquire new content knowledge, new skills. So, did we find the video? Stand up, please, nice and loud. Thank you.
Define education.
I have to go now, actually. We're out of time. You know, the best definition of education that I ever read was from Jean Piaget, the Swiss developmental psychologist. He said the ultimate aim of education must be to overcome egocentrism in two domains. He said overcoming egocentrism intellectually means learning to reason, means learning logic, means learning to weigh evidence. He said emotionally, overcoming egocentrism means learning what he called reciprocity, or what we would call empathy. To me, that's a start. I think that's, and I go back to Einstein's quote too, that the aim of education is not kind of to learn facts, but to learn how to think. Empathy, reason, that's a start. Other questions? Yes, please. Nice and loud. Stand up, please.
If you had children,
Which I do. And grandchildren. I know, I don't look older.
if you had children or grandchildren lived in Hawaii, would you send them to public schools, K through 12, regardless of what area of the island you lived on, why or why not?
That's a really tough question. I don't know enough about what might be a sacrifice my children would make if I made a stand, a principle. I don't know. I know what I'd look for. I know what I'd support in my kids. The idea of following their passions. And I'd look for teachers who gave kids more time to follow their passions. My kids, in fact, have been in a combination of public and private schools. My grandkids are all in public schools. So let me tell you something. Yes, please.
So to follow up on that.
Nice and loud.
Follow up on that question. You said that we can be a model to the nation, maybe as a state. What will it take for public, private, and charter schools to come together
Yeah, well, we'll take the collaborative, cooperative. I think, first of all, acknowledging that we have common goals. That whether they're general learner outcomes or the aims of a criminal education, it's the same goal. It's the same striving. It's the same aspiration. It's not that it's so radically different. Secondly, we have similar challenges. How do we improve learning every single day? How do we empower kids to be the architects of their own learning? Thirdly, how do we reduce stress? Here's something I'm going to share with you it's a new idea. I've been to Finland, and it's, you know, the best education system in the world, and yet kids start school a year later, they have a shorter school day, they have a shorter school year, they do almost no homework. How do they do that? Best education system, best outcome. Here's what I've learned about brain research. The prefrontal cortex, where we have focus, self-discipline, tenacity, perseverance, discipline, self-discipline, and so on. It's destroyed by stress. The synapses actually are destroyed by stress. Now, I've seen different kinds of stress. Poverty is the #1 stressor. We cannot hope to close the achievement gap until we address the issue of poverty and specifically the stresses on kids' lives that are literally eating their brains. This is literally. I'm not kidding you. Now here's the good news. We can rebuild those synapses in the prefrontal cortex through nurturance. That's why small schools usually work better than large schools, period. New small public high schools in New York can significantly outperform large schools. Nurturance matters. Guess what happens in Finland? Looping. Teacher spends 3 or 4 years with the same kids. It's a family. I think one secret of Finland's success that no one has written about that I know of is there's no stress in those classrooms. 0. Here's another commonality. I see stress in nearly every classroom I walk in, whether it's an elite independent school classroom or a high-poverty public school classroom. Kids are incredibly stressed for different reasons and in different ways. But that's a common challenge. We have to do something about that. Time for a couple more questions. Yes, please.
If all the kids are going to college or in that route, can you transform K-12 without also transforming what college is in the future?
No. Next question. So, but seriously, here's what I'd love to sort of, and again, borrowing a page from Finland. My biggest fear about Common Core is creating a college prep curriculum for every single kid. And that is a huge mistake. In Finland, you begin a conversation with kids around 7th grade, and then in 10th grade, they choose between a CTE track and an academic track. They choose. They're not tested in or out. Both tracks lead to forms of higher ed. So here's the conversation I propose we ought to begin having with young people, 9th, 10th grade. First of all, we ought to give them a work-based internship, a requirement. Secondly, we ought to do job shadowing, career days, exposing kids to what goes on in the real world and what the possibilities are. Then we begin a conversation with them saying, how do you imagine yourself in the world? What do you want to do, make, create, contribute? How do you want to work with other people? What do you want to do? And if you ask those questions of kids, they'll have answers. I know that because I've done it. I did it yesterday. Then the question is, and what step after high school do you imagine would be most helpful to you? You don't ask them, where do you want to go to college? Or if you want to go, you say, well, what are the steps that might help you get to that vision of being an adult? To me, that's the conversation we're having. And of course you're right. Colleges, many of them are broken. They're driven by tenured faculty who favor research over teaching. That's simple. But there are a lot of good small schools out there. There's a lot of post-secondary trade programs, junior colleges. There are a lot more choices if only we expand kids' thinking. Yes, please. Question.
Yes. So we had a...
Nice and loud so we can hear.
My partner and I come from 2 very different schools. I'm with a charter school in a wealthier area of Wagner. She's with a public school, DOE school, in a more lower income part of the state. And so we were talking about your things, and I found out that I can probably go in on Monday, and I'm an aide
Yeah.
I'm not a teacher at the school, but I could probably go in on Monday, talk to the teacher about what I wish to do, talk to the third grade teacher about what
Yeah.
I'd like to do, and be able to implement it by the end of the year. When we talked about it, then when she brought that up, she said, I think the fear is that it's more systemic, and that the fear is that that's not as, we're both trying to find out how do we work with, to break down the compliance.
Yeah.
And that it's more systemic with the DOE than with maybe
Yeah.
charters or.
Well, the scale is a huge element. Large schools run by compliance, because they don't have the communities of practice created. They don't have the scale to work in a more collaborative fashion. They don't have the time. So what Art did with his principles was create the time and the space to create these communities of practice. So I think what we see in large high schools are generally pretty broken. We need to break them down into academies. We need to create career exploration tracks. And there, within those smaller units, we can be more nimble and try new things. Yes, please. Probably the last question.
I'd like to thank you for your presentation, very inspirational. And I was thinking a lot about Finland's education, which I studied quite a bit during your presentation, so I'm glad to hear your follow-up remarks, especially particularly pertaining to stress. I also wanted to say one thing that the Finnish comparisons have brought to light is how overworked American teachers are.
Absolutely.
We spend more time in front of kids than any other society besides Chile. And the stress is top down in a lot of ways. We're all stressed out. We work 7 days a week. We have double the students, 1/3 or 1/4 of the preparation time. So, and the only way to address that is additional funds so that we can bring in more teachers, reduce the number of hours that teachers have to spend in front of kids, et cetera, et cetera. And that's very political, huge can of worms. Where do we get the money? We're just wondering if you could comment on that.
Well, you're absolutely right in what you cite. I'll take it a couple of steps further. Finland's education motto is trust through professionalism. That's their motto as a country. That's a great model and motto for Hawaii. The ministry trusts the municipalities to adapt or adopt a common curriculum as needed. The municipalities trust the teachers, and the teachers trust the kids. There are no internet filters on any of the computers I saw in Finnish classrooms. But they only can do that because they transform teacher preparation and teacher working conditions, to your point. Every teacher since the mid-'70s in Finland earns a real master's degree, which takes several years. They have to do real research, and they work in a team for an entire year with a master-mentor teacher as a team, developing lessons, critiquing lessons. They learn teamwork. Community practice, sharing problems of practice, is the norm. That's what they learn in their graduate schools of education. It's become one of the highest status professions in Finland because teachers are, in a sense, trained as scientists, working together to create new knowledge around problems of practice. And they're given the time, the working conditions. The average teacher in Finland spends 600 hours a year in front of kids. Our teachers spend an average of 1,100 hours a year in front of kids. We can't do this until we train educators to be scientists, give them the working conditions that allow them to create the new knowledge to solve these challenges. We don't know how to educate all kids for work, learning, and citizenship in the innovation era. It's not like there's a book off the shelf, mine or anybody else's, that will tell you how to do that. We have to create that new knowledge. And we need the training, the support, and the working conditions to permit us to do that. Mahalo. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your